Hey, kia ora koutou whānau, ki te piha koe. Welcome back to another edition of Big Hero News. I hope you can all hear me. It's lovely and clear, and everything is just fine, unlike last night. Kia ora team. Good to see so many of you in the chat already, going for it, having a bit of a chin wag with one another about what's going on in the news. Kia ora to you all. G'day, Michael. Morning, says Michael. Michael says good morning. Morning all. Michael, are you somewhere internationally tuning into us? Shayan? Yeah, hopefully I agree with you about that. I guess we're going to just... The reason I was a minute later than usual was I was just double checking with a friend, a Jason, technical guy, to make sure that we were all working. So I think that we're all working. Hello, Felix. Good to see you again. Hello, JK. Good to see you again. Gosh, it's good to see so many of you in the chat there. Look at you all going for it. Dave's in there as well, and a bunch of new people as well. Now, I think, although kia ora Cheryl, kia ora Luke, hi Raywin, hi Tracy, hi Mr. Anderson, Mute Cat says audio problems. Thanks very much. I'm assuming that's a joke. I don't know if it's a joke, because other people are saying. Okay, I'm assuming that's a joke. Better be a joke. And also, I think, just so you know, we are also live on Twitch at the moment. Not Twitch, sorry, TikTok at the moment as well. I'm just looking over to my other screen. I think we're live on the TikTok at the same time as well. Now, I have not introduced another camera tonight. I am not going to put the dog on screen. I am just going to do a normal show and see how we go. For those of you, this is the worst thing to do in broadcasting. You're never supposed to explain your mistakes because most people don't know. So people who are turning up tonight, you won't know there was a huge balls up last night, but there was, and we're here. And I think I'm here by myself tonight. I don't think we've got Chewy tonight, so it's just us, but we've got a lot going on, and yeah, actually a lot going on. Yeah, Felix, go have a look on TikTok. Make sure that we're broadcasting live over there, and we're fine. So let me say one thing to you very, very quickly. We didn't do this at all last night. For those of you who are new to us, you won't know about this, but we do merch runs and we do limited edition merch runs. So this merch run at the moment is going until officially tomorrow. Officially, this ends tomorrow. And by merch run, we mean the merch that's tailored to a season, like these hoodies and these t-shirts. And they say very clearly, if the left vote, the left wins, right? Now, we're going to have a look at some polls and stuff tonight. And you might feel a little bit upset about that if you want the left to win. But the truth is, Western civilization is by far and away more left-leaning than right-leaning. But the lefties are also the people who don't participate very well in elections. If everyone in New Zealand voted, if every single person did vote who had to vote, it would be an easy win to the left. So this is the encouragement, no matter what the polls are, for you to say to people, get out and vote. Get out and vote, get out and vote. We've also got some BHN merch as well, t-shirts and hoodies. They will stay when the other ones run out. And for those of you who are new, if you can see down in the bottom corner there of this merch, there's a little OB. See that OB down there? You can get white ones or black ones. Now, we did that so it's a unique run, a limited edition. I'm a kid of the 90s, and I grew up on NWA and Ice-T and Ice Cube and whole bunch of gangster rap. That's what I have and had. And an OG, for those of you, I mean, I said this to my kids the other day about being an OG, and they said, Dad, that just means original. Back in the day, it meant original gangster. That's what an OG was. So if you're an OG here, technically what you are is an OB, because you're an original beardy. Big Hero News, original beardy. So for any BHN merch in and of itself that's printed and sold in 2023, it'll have an OB on the back, which means when we are bigger than Jesus, or whatever the saying's supposed to be, you'll be able to have merch where you go, I was there on day one. It's not really day one, it's about episode 500 or 600 at the moment, but we're only just getting into this kind of stuff. And you yourself, if you decide to get some merch, could be, gosh, I'm just trying to, there we go, could be as cool as Bomber. There you go, there's Bomber. In his red hoodie, if the left vote, the left win. So be like Bomber. Head to bhnshop.nz and get yourself a hoodie or a t-shirt. Now, the other thing is if you buy some product during the live stream, right, and use the delivery code or the promo code OOPSIE, OOPSIE, I did that based on last night's show, then you'll get free delivery. And for some of you out there, like Waiheke Island, for example, Postage is about $15. So actually, free delivery is pretty good for many of you. It's only available in New Zealand, that free delivery. But if you want to use that free delivery code, OOPSIE, oopsie, that's only active until 10:30 p.m. tonight. So you need to be watching live to do it. There you go. There's the lovely Bomber. He did a little pitch for us on his website. So you can be like Bomber if you want. Do you want to be like Bomber? You can be like Bomber. bhnshop.nz. And I'll leave that promo code going on the bottom of the screen for the whole episode. It looks like we're working in TikTok as well. Can I say to you guys who are watching us on TikTok, because it's a separate source, I probably will find it more difficult to get to your comments. So if you want your comments to count, head to YouTube. It's the best place to do it. And also, if you super chat, then that's the easiest for us to see. Right, lots going on tonight. But first of all, I wanted to say something that I'm pretty grumpy about, and that's TVNZ headlines. There is typically what happens in politics is we always think the media is against our side. You know, you hear lots of people on the right talking about how the liberal media and the left-wing media and the mouthpiece of Jacinda Ardern media, and then when it turns the other way, you hear all the people on the left saying, oh, the right-wing media. And I actually don't think either of those things are true. I think from working in media for more than 20 years, I have to tell you that media is pretty much focused on profits, and within the media there are people on the left and people on the right. There might be more journalists who are left-leaning, cool, fair. But for example, if you look at the New Zealand Herald, someone like Simon Wilson, who is left-leaning, is certainly in the minority. So what I like to look at, though, is our media giving us good information, right? And the polls came out tonight, and this was the headline that TVNZ put on their website. Winston Peters heading back to Parliament. So apparently, according to TVNZ, we can basically cancel our election day. We don't have to have an election day anymore because they have decided, based on their poll, which may or may not be accurate, that Winston Peters is heading back to Parliament. Personally, I think that's frickin' disgusting. Because what a poll is a snapshot of how the country is in that moment with a margin of error. For TVNZ to be saying, Winston Peters heading back to Parliament, I'm like, well, the last three polls that I've seen of Winston Peters for other groups, he was under 5%. For TVNZ, he's on 5%, and they've declared him heading back to Parliament. And not only that, one step worse than that, they used a fucking breaking news banner. Now, I don't know how you receive information, but if something's breaking news, I typically sit up and pay more attention because it's something really important. Breaking news, you know, when we were going through COVID, those klaxons would play. Breaking news, you know, Whakaari White Island. Breaking news, earthquake in Hamilton. Breaking news, we did a poll and our poll says this. So that means this might possibly happen and we're going to sell it as breaking news. Pretty pissy about that. I'm pretty pissy about that, to be really honest with you. I'm pretty upset, and I don't know, I'm not much of a complainer, but I think it's pretty shoddy, to be perfectly honest. Let me say as well, because I'm here by myself tonight, I mean, Chewy may turn up at some stage, but I'm assuming we're going to be here through by ourselves tonight. I do miss a lot of the texts that come through, because quite often I'll be organising all the information for us to see and hear, and Chewy will be keeping an eye on the text. So I will do my best to get your comments out there, but it's going to be harder tonight with only one person on. Like, I'll try and do this. I'm pissy on the daily with the media, to be honest. Saying JK saying it should be a media complaint. JN saying God, TV media is pathetic. Yes, I agree with all those things. I agree with all those things. You have to remember that the media in general, and look, we're not in this camp only because we're not commercially viable yet, we're too small, but I've worked for those groups before, for those big groups, and I have seen what profits need to be done. I remember being hauled over the coals because I talked about an in-ceiling ventilation system, you know, the DVS, HRV, those things. I had a different supplier in Auckland, and I just talked about it when I was working as a talkback host, and I talked about how good I thought my one was, and I was very clear that all those other ones are fine, but I thought mine was the best. The head of one of the groups who were paying for advertising on the station made a complaint about me because I was talking about other in-ceiling ventilation system. What drives media is money. And if smashing the left gets them more ratings, that gets them more money. If smashing the right gets them more ratings, then that gets them more money. So if there is an ideology in mainstream media, it's profit as opposed to which side of politics they're going to sit on. One other thing I wanted to show you super quick, and this is where we're going to test to see if our sound's working, Whānau. So if it's not, you can be pretty quick to tell me, and then I don't know what we're going to do tonight. Homophobia, racism, white supremacy, all those isms, yeah? We hear about that and we go, oh, that's pretty ugly. There was a lovely piece of xenophobia that I heard last night. It was at a debate, and the reason it's lovely is because it doesn't include someone's skin colour. There was the Taxpayers Union held a debate, and there was a lovely Scottish man who was reading out some results from the debate, and he got heckled by a xenophobic attendee. Have a listen to this. It's something to behold, actually. It's not gross or disgusting, but you just go to see when someone was to just out other people because they're different. It doesn't matter if it's a skin colour or a religion or whatever. It's just that they're different. This guy has a Scottish accent, and that was enough to send someone off in the crowd.
Just wait for the slide to move on.
Can we get a Kiwi to talk to us?
Can we get a Kiwi to talk to us?
So, national.
And then some people cheering in the background. Can we get a Kiwi to talk to us? That was the complaint. And then clapping in the background. So, if you are a minority, maybe you'll find solace in the fact that if a elderly Caucasian man, and I am stereotyping, but I think I can hear that in the voice, would yell at another Caucasian man because they've got a funny accent, it's kind of the battle is lost. You know what I'm saying? The battle is lost. Just let them be vile little people, because they're always going to find something. They're always going to find something to go off on, no matter what. All right, team, let's get into it tonight. We're going to start tonight with the poll that's come out on TVNZ. Let's have a look at the story, and then let's have a bit of a chat about what we're seeing in the story.
With 19 days until early voting starts, here's how today's numbers compare to our One News poll 3 weeks ago. National is on 39, up 2. Labour's down 1 to 28. The Greens also dipping, now sitting on 10. ACT is on 10 as well, down 3. New Zealand First is on 5. So on these numbers, Winston Peters is back in the game, and Te Pāti Māori is steady on 3.
Now, that was fine. The way Jess did it then, on these numbers, he'd be back in, but that's not what, as I've shown you, what the headline says. Winston Peters heading back to Parliament. So let's have a look at the numbers. Pretty strong for the right, pretty shithouse for the left. You've got about 28, 38, plus the Māori Party, 41%, plays about 60% if you include New Zealand First. People saying they don't believe the numbers. Yeah, the numbers may or may not be right. We've looked at the polls over the past 3 elections pretty heavily. If you're new to this, then you haven't seen this. And the polls are normally within margin of error to the result. On the odd occasion, National over polls by 5 or 6%. Now, I'm not saying that because I think it's going to happen here, but that has happened a couple of times in the past before. What else has Jess got for us?
Let's look at some of the other smaller parties now, and there are only 2 that are registering in our poll. Top, the Opportunities Party is steady on 1, and the New Conservative Party is also on 1.
I wonder why TVNZ or any broadcaster actually even broadcast these. I can understand you're actually broadcasting the top result because RAF has a chance in Ireland, although it looks uphill struggle. But New Conservative don't need to be mentioned, even if they're at 1%. I wonder why they're even being mentioned. I don't know. Maybe it's fair. It just seems a bit of a waste of design space to me.
The number of people who don't know how they'll vote has now shrunk to 10% after sitting around 12 or 13% all year. Time to swing around now and show you how those numbers translate to seats in Parliament.
Now, if you're new to us, we don't pay much attention to this because this is where the media goes. This is what the Parliament would look like, yes, if the election today was today and your poll was accurate. But what you can do is look at this and see what this is what means This is what the true percentage would be. Because even if you get 49% right now, because there's a bunch of people who are undecided, or there are a bunch of people who will vote for the under 5% parties, 49% of the polls might actually be 53 or 54 or 55% of the seats. So all we do here in this show when we look at this is we look at what the true percentage would be.
On that side of the House over there, National gets 49 MPs in blue. Add in 13 seats from ACT, you get 62. That's enough to form a government with just the two of them.
So let's just talk to this super quick. And I'm sorry to keep interrupting this, but, it's my show. 62 and they need 61. So this is within margin of error, them either needing Winston Peters or it being a minority government. So the media is selling it like this is a slam dunk for the right, this is a slam dunk for National ACT, but they're only, based on this poll, which is a snapshot, 1 seat more than they need. So if they were to lose 2 seats from their projections right now, they couldn't form a government. So I'm not saying it's all on like it's 50-50, but it's not quite a done deal yet that we're going to be under a National ACT government either. Both those extremes are still in play.
New Zealand First would bring in 7 MPs, but they wouldn't be needed. On this side, Labour gets 35 MPs in red, add in 13 from the Greens and 3 from Te Pāti Māori. That's just 51. 10 short of the 61 seats needed to form a government.
Yep. And if you keep looking at these and you see, if National was down a couple and ACT was down a couple and New Zealand First wasn't there, and then Māori Party got 1 more and the Greens were up a couple and Labour were up a couple, that's why I'm saying we don't really look at this as to being too predictive of what's going to happen. We look at this to go give us so based on this poll, the true percentage is that National and ACT get past the 50% mark of seats. Now, just to explain that for people, why 49% of the vote can be like 53% of the seats is there's always a percentage of the voters who don't count. When I say don't count, I mean you're lovely people, you all count, but don't count to the final tally. And that's just simply because let's say 4 parties get 1%. So that means actually when those 2 parties add together and they make up to 49%, not 50%, they only take it out of the 96% remainder. So because there's 4 parties on 1%, that comes off the 100%. So that actually means all of the other results are then banked out of 96%. And that's how you can get over that margin, even if you don't get 50% of the vote.
Let's bring up the preferred Prime Minister numbers now. Chris Hipkins is on 23. Christopher Luxon is right there with him. Both Chris's have nudged up in popularity in the last 3 weeks. David Seymour is on 5 and Winston Peters is on 4. So that's how the numbers have landed in the thick of campaigning.
Yep.
He's back and hot to trot.
To govern a country, you need experience. And this is not our first rodeo.
Riding high.
Rodeo. I'm going with rodeo. I don't know why Winston Peters goes with rodeo. I don't know, maybe.
With his best poll result in 4 years.
No, we've already known that. We're way past 5% already.
Not that he believes in polls.
You're making a terrible mistake of believing your polls. Don't, because you'll mislead the public. Thank you very much.
It's interesting. You always remember what he just said. Don't believe your polls, but you can believe our polls. Hang on. Either polls are okay and scientific or they're not. So Winston's always done this. He tried to introduce a law into Parliament, in the last 20 years, because he's been here for 200, where you couldn't release any polling for the 3 months leading up to the election because he thought it unfairly influenced people. But now that he is needing polls and wanting polls, of course, they're going to talk about them as much as possible.
Christopher Luxon would rather cut him loose, but won't, just in case.
He's not in Parliament. He hasn't been above thresholds.
Peddling the same answer despite this new result.
I've been very clear. I want New Zealanders to understand if you want a guaranteed change of government, don't vote for any other party, vote for the National Party.
Winston Peters is a force for chaos. A National ACT New Zealand First government would be disastrous for New Zealand.
ACT isn't on board either. David Seymour's not keen to partner up with his political foe.
Yeah.
He's really got little, if anything, to offer for the hopes and aspirations that Kiwis have.
Later on tonight in the show, I've talked to a professor from Massey University who's written a piece for The Conversation online publication, and his position is post the election, actually whether National wins or not, National's got a real problem with the parties to the right of them. That interview is coming up later on tonight, so make sure you stick around for that.
Do you respect Winston Peters?
Again, I know him. I don't know him that well. I know him a little bit, but not that well.
Here we go.
The Labour leader reckons this is as bad as it gets
Good luck, everybody.
and says its political fortunes will turn around.
I think we're on the way back up again now.
Good choices.
Oh, but that's not. I've only just started.
The Greens agree Christopher Luxon shouldn't be getting ahead of himself.
He should refrain from measuring the curtains in the beehive just yet.
And the co-leaders back their record in propping up a Labour government.
If you look at the long-term trend, our poll numbers are up on where they were in 2020, which was up on where they were in 2017, so we're really encouraged.
But 39 is a whopping number. This is the 6th One News poll this year, and until now, National has sat between 34 and 37.
I think the message is really clear. Kiwis want change.
ACT says Kiwis aren't fazed about 5 candidates dropping out.
It's actually a very good result for ACT. It shows a change of government, with ACT a big part of that.
Hands up in the air.
Te Pāti Māori launched its campaign early and has been getting on with it.
While everyone else is sort of in disarray, scrapping for trying to prove who they are, we've been really adamant about what we stand for and, most importantly, what our goals towards an Aotearoa Hoa.
We'll know who's heading to Wellington and who's heading home in the middle of next month.
Yep.
All right, Jess, explain why this result for New Zealand First is so important for the political landscape.
This matters because National is very close to needing the support of New Zealand First. To govern, you need 61 seats. National and ACT on these latest numbers are on 62. So they're only 2 seats away from needing to rely on Winston Peters for help. And that's why we've seen Christopher Luxon choosing his words so carefully today and other times when we've asked him, refusing to rule out working with Winston Peters. And
So this is the reality, and we did a piece on this the other day. You can go look at the back catalogue if you want to check up on it. Winston Peters, he's bending the knee to the anti-vaxxers and the anti-mandates and the anti-co-governance crowd. Like, he's bending the knee to them because that's where his support base is coming from. And Christopher Luxon is not ruling him out in case Christopher Luxon needs to bend the knee to Winston Peters to allow him to become Prime Minister. That's what's happening right now. And whilst New Zealand First is doing all the worst things in the world, at the New Zealand Worst, there you go, New Zealand First, New Zealand Worst, at the moment to do with, issues around, Māori not being Indigenous, trans issues, anti-mandate, anti-vaccine, all the worst things in the world. Christopher Luxon, who doesn't buy into any of that ideology, and I'm not being kind to him, we just know that, is not prepared to rule him out, although he is prepared to rule out the Māori Party. He's not prepared to rule them out because he may need them to become Prime Minister. Yeah, that wasn't bad either, was it? I can see Sam speaking from my New Zealand Worst. Yep, New Zealand Worst. Or Winston First, that's the other one.
Refusing to block his path to power. That's what we saw Labor do 2 weeks ago. They said they just wouldn't work with him.
Labor's numbers aren't looking very good. How likely is it, if at all, that Labor might change leader a few weeks out, just like it did in 2017? We know how that turned out.
Highly unlikely that it would change leaders.
Zero.
And that's because it's too late in the campaign and because they don't have anyone waiting in the wings. Like you say, in 2017, Jacinda Ardern, she switched leaders. It was only 7 weeks before the election, but the campaign hadn't started yet. Plus, she was polling really well. One of the problems for Labor is that Chris Hipkins out on the campaign trail can be quite wooden when he doesn't know people, going up to people. They're hoping that in these big set pieces he will do better, including the first leaders debate when they go head to head, which is due to take place here at TVNZ in a week's time.
There you go. Sorry, I got distracted a little bit because I've just been kicked off TikTok whilst we did that. Your access to live and multi-guest will be restored on September 13th. Your access to mobile gaming and live studio will be restored on September 13th. Violation reasons, general. Your live access was suspended for violating our community guidelines. Our community guidelines apply to everyone and everything shared on TikTok. They provide guidance on what is and isn't allowed on the platform. Visit our community guidelines for more information. See community guidelines. All right. Well, that didn't last very long, did it? You people who are watching us on TikTok, I do apologise about that, but we've just been booted off TikTok. I'm not sure why. YouTube wins yet again, says Costo. Yeah, I guess so, but I mean, oh well, I guess it's their platform. I don't know what we violated. Perhaps because we were showing TVNZ, maybe. I don't know. Could be that. Might not be that. Okay, so yes, sorry, I got a bit distracted there at the very end, didn't I? See, this is what happens when you don't have a co-host. You have to do all these things yourself, and I have to find. There it is. There. I'm just opening up my interview. Sorry about this, guys. Sorry about this, team. Just opening up my interview at the same time, so we can do that. Yes. It's not TikTok, it's trolls making reports. Fair enough. Not enough Fortnite dances. I'm a bit over the pie munching. Yeah, I'm with you on that, Luke. You know, I actually think I said it a few weeks ago. As soon as they blow on the pie, that thing from that cop show, always blow on the pie, that became very, very old, very, very quickly. A lefty telling the truth. I don't know. We had conversations on TikTok tonight. Who was I going to? Because I did a little live when who was I going to vote for? I don't know. Don't know who I'm going to vote for yet. I know who I'm not going to vote for, but I'm not sure who I'm going to vote for. I'm not entirely sure because I'm just looking at Ratas saying 2 ticks red, 1 tick red, 1 tick green, no ticks blue. Yeah, I'm not sure. Not yet sure. Not yet sure. All right. What I'd like to do, because it kind of does dovetail into that conversation quite well, is go to our our interview for the night now. I spoke earlier to Professor Richard Shaw. Professor Richard Shaw wrote a piece on the conversation. I always struggle with the name of that thing. Where is it? Let me bring it up. Here it is here. Wrote a piece on the conversation. There it is for you right there. After the election, Christopher Luxon's real test could come from his right, not the left. So I got a chance to sit down this afternoon with Professor Richard Shaw, and we'll play this for you right now. And then when we come back, we're going to finish off that conversation that we started 2 nights ago, unfortunately because of our technical difficulties last night, we didn't get to it, about Christopher Luxon on Q&A. And the thing that I want to get to about that is he's talking actually quite a bit about his, about the tax cuts and how they're going to fund them, because that conversation is still going on. Now, a little heads up, I also hear that there is going to be a release tomorrow by a bunch of economists. They're going to slam the hell out of the tax cuts, and especially about the foreign buyers tax. So that's going to be for tomorrow. But for tonight, we definitely will get back to the Christopher Luxon Q&A conversation. But right now, let's go and have a chat with Professor Richard Shaw. Professor Richard Shaw and me had a bit of a chat about his article in the conversation. Professor Shaw is from Massey University and teaches comparative and New Zealand politics with a particular focus on elections and electoral systems. You must be in big demand at the moment, Richard, for your time, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's that stage in the 3 yearly cycle back where people taking it, well, not you clearly, but other people taking it. All right,
I'm hearing you say there's no sound there, guys. Is that the case? You can hear me though. I sound fine. I'm assuming I sound lovely right now in the background. Yeah, that's me talking in the background. Okay, I don't know why that did that. I'm real sorry, guys. It's as I said, it's always difficult to run this with just one person. Give me a sec. I'm going to do one other thing. If we can't play that video, there's plenty of other things we can talk about, and we will put that up on YouTube, or we'll play it tomorrow night. But I will do one more thing, as I will open that up into I'll open up into Chrome, and I'll play it off Chrome, because it might be that it's not sharing it because it's not in Chrome. Open with Chrome. Joining us this evening, and we'll try one more time. And if it doesn't work, I'm not gonna push it. We'll just see if it works. All right, so this is Professor Richard Shaw with a conversation about Christopher Luxon having an issue with the right post-election. Joining us this evening is Professor Richard Shaw. Professor Shaw is from Massey University and teaches comparative and New Zealand politics with a particular focus on elections and electoral systems. You must be in big demand at the moment, Richard, for your time, I'm sure.
It's that stage in the 3 yearly cycle back where people taking it, well, not you clearly, but other people take an interest in elections and electoral systems, and there's plenty to get stuck into, that's for sure.
Yeah, so thank you for giving us a little bit of time today. I want to bring up the conversation that we're going to have, and that is based around the article you have written and has been posted in the conversation. I think it actually went in there today, in V. So hot off the press, Richard, we're hot off the press. Where you state after the election, now this is, I guess, assuming, I think you do say in the article whether they win or not, but after the election, Christopher Luxon's real test could come from his right, not the left. And of course, when we think about his right, we're thinking about ACT. Maybe we're thinking about New Zealand First. I think their rhetoric at the moment feels like it's coming from the further right, but I think where they naturally sit is more centrist. It feels like they may be going after some votes by being controversial as opposed to actually genuinely sitting on the further right. But at the moment, the way they're all talking, further right to national would be ACT and New Zealand First. And I guess some of those minor parties who chances are aren't going to be there. So do you want to explain to us what you mean that Christopher Luxon's real test could come from his right post-election?
Sure. I think that there is something that is occurring on the right generally of New Zealand politics. And that something has to do with the way in which ACT has built over a little while now an electoral coalition on the right. Mm-hmm. And it largely comprises disaffected farmers, not all farmers clearly, but there is a lobby within the farming community which I think is showing signs of frustration or disaffection with the National Party.
Pushed by Groundswell? Do you think Groundswell is the kind of pushing point for that?
I don't know if Groundswell is a pushing point, but it's certainly a vehicle for the expression of that kind of view. I think that part of that goes a long way back to the revolution of the 80s and 90s, the liberalisation of farming markets and commodity markets and so on.
For sure.
But there is also something kind of cultural going on around the natural dominance of the stories about this country and who comprises the backbone of the nation and so on and so forth, which I think is challenging farmers' positions. So, and I drove up to Taranaki over the weekend. You see ACT Party billboards all the way up the south coast of Taranaki. So there's something
big war chest, eh? They've got a big war chest for all that.
Seriously big war chest, certainly compared to parties on the left and the centre left. So it seems to me, I don't have the data yet. We'll see what happens during the election, but it seems as if there's a component of that vote there amongst the agricultural sector, which is peeling away from national and heading across to ACT. And you bring that together with the sort of the natural constituency of ACT, which is low tax loving urban liberals. And I think both of those groups they are people to whom national might historically have thought were their people, and now they're not people. Now they look as if they might be going somewhere else. Look, I don't know, National or the ACT Party have been hovering around 10, 11, 12, 14, 15% by some polls for a while now. They dropped back in the one that came out this morning. I haven't seen the tonight's poll, but but ACT are holding up really well. And so it seems that there is some realignment that might be going on the right of the National Party, which, irrespective of what happens at the election, the National Party under Christopher Luxon might need to get its head around.
When you say that his test could come from the right, Christopher Luxon's test could come from the right post-election, we have Simon Wilson on from the New Zealand Herald a fair bit, and he wrote an article maybe 2 months ago that said, there's a possibility that ACT could be the biggest party on the right at the following election. I guess that's kind of what you're saying as well. Like, you're not saying that, but if his issue is going to come from the right, it sounds like we're also saying the further right could overtake National to be the dominant party.
Well, you look at if by the further right, if there is a space to the right of the National Party which comprises people who are presently indicating support for New Zealand First, the ACT Party, the various fringe parties that have been set up by former MPs and various conspiracy theorists and so on. That's not an insignificant vote. It's reasonably fragmented and a little bit chaotic at the moment. But if it were to cohere around some, that is kind of natural ACT Party territory in a sense. So I think Wilson is right. I don't think this election is important because if Luxon and the National Party have to rely upon Seymour, who stands his ground, and he's only prepared to offer support on confidence, and every other thing has to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. That is a very, very difficult administration for Luxon to administer on a day-to-day basis. But I think Wilson's right. I think the longer-term challenge to the natural place of the National Party and the stories we tell ourselves about centre-right conservative politics in Aotearoa, New Zealand, they come at the next election. They come in 26 and in 29.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? I mean, how much of this has got to do with, my words, not yours, but Luxon's unlikability? I mean, you write in your article, Luxon is still lacks political definition in a way John Key, former National Party leader and Prime Minister, whose political success it is Luxon's job to reprise. The two things that most people knew about John Key were that he was born in a state house and grew up to become an international man of finance. Luxon hasn't got his story across. He's not quite as, touch point like John Key was. How much of the movement towards ACT do you think has to do specifically with the leader of National versus a general drift? I mean, if you have a look at it in the US, the general drift to the right, Trumpian. I mean, Trump is now the major voice on the right in America, and his supporters seems to be driving all politics. So is it about the current National Party and its leadership, or is it a trend in politics that's giving that further right, the space to the right of National, more of a more impact at the moment and forthcoming?
I think it's the second of those 2 points, Pat. I don't think much of this has to do with Christopher Luxon at all. It predates him, and the deeper sort of structural realignments that are going on, particularly in the farming community, they occurred long before Christopher Luxon became leader of the National Party. So I don't think that he has much to do with this. I know there's a bit of a tendency at the moment to use the language of presidential elections in the context of what's going on here. I don't think that's necessarily all that helpful either, because we don't live in a republic. We're not a presidential system. We're a parliamentary system. And sure, the leaders really matter because we have this intense personalisation, but not necessarily the presidentialisation of parliamentary politics. So, it's easy for us to look at Luxon or Hipkins or Seymour and whomever, and we do that just because those guys, they are all guys, aren't they? They're just shorthand. They're political shorthand. They give us a really quick and easy way of making sense of their parties. But I think if Wilson is right, and if there is some kind of realignment going on, if what I'm suggesting turns out to be the case, and it's really speculative at the moment, this doesn't have a whole lot to do with Luxon, other than in the way in which the National Party respond strategically to this, if it does become a thing.
As an academic, do you kind of comment on good or bad, or do you just see the trends and analyse them? So, like, if the New Zealand right went further right, and I think, again, not to compare it directly to America, but that's what you're seeing is when certain politicians on the right have realised that Trumpian language and demeanour is working, they've taken it on board, it would appear, to get the vote. Do you think, say, ACT was the bigger party in the following election, that would be good for New Zealand, bad for New Zealand, or as an academic, do you just observe what's happening and comment on it?
That's a really good question. I think my role as an academic is to observe, comment, offer ways of making sense of those sorts of developments and trends, try and bring something to a conversation that maybe would not otherwise have been there. I have to be really careful, I think, in most contexts, not to take a normative position. There are a couple of reasons why that's the case, and the most obvious one is that if I pin my partisan politics on a wall behind me, then that quite reasonably calls into question in many people's minds my capacity to offer anything like a reasonably impartial, partisan, non-partisan interpretation of things. So I need to be a little bit careful about that.
Do you think, although we're talking about the gap to the right of National, that the current embodiment of National, again in America they say, this is not Ronald Reagan's Republican Party. This is not the Republican Party of your granddad. This is very different. Your article says one journalist suggested a national victory would produce an unruly rump of zealots championing Christian identity politics and pose, quote, a significant risk to National's cohesiveness and its ability to hold that power. Do you think where National Party sits today is not the National Party of Bill English and John Key, and it is further to the right?
I think if you look at their standard position on those defining issues, tax, the role of the market, the relationship between the state and the private sector, then it's clearly the National Party. But I think if you look at the biographies and the personal preferences of a number of the people who are presently in the National Party's caucus, and some of those who would come in if National poll in the low 40s in the coming election, then they will bring with them views which are not necessarily views that have been held in large kind of concentrations in that caucus. I mean, I don't think that's not necessarily an issue until it becomes an issue because they start to inform the policy positions that the National Party take. We've got a really long tradition in this country of essentially having a secular parliament. One of the very first things that happened when the very first parliament sat in Auckland at Tamaki Makaurau in 1854 was there was a parliamentary debate about getting a man of the cloth in on the floor of the House to offer a prayer. And the parliamentarians, all of whom would have been religious men at the time, said, no, we're not having that.
Yeah.
So we didn't have the religious presence. We still have prayer, and there was kind of arguments around that. But we do have this reasonably strict conventional distinction between state and religion. We're not a theocracy. So it isn't an issue, I think, if it remains a private concern. But then you get another really interesting question as well. To what extent can you become a policymaker in the New Zealand Parliament or the executive branch and keep your private concerns out of it? I think that article by Andrea Vance was really interesting. I think the one written by Matthew Hooton from memory, North and South, maybe a year or two ago, uses much, much, much firmer language. Hooton talks about the Taliban within the National Party. You know, there has long been a tension within the National Party between the sort of the urban conservatives, what the Tories in the UK would call One Nation Tories, One Nation National Party people, and people who are more religiously and morally or ethically conservative. And I think the balance has probably swung towards the second of those groups. And
Right.
in the present climate of the nature of politics, contemporary politics, those people are less inclined to sit on their views and more inclined to bring them into the public domain. And that becomes an issue, I think, absolutely.
Well, I think that's actually the tenet of the kind of Christian faith, is that you have an outworking of it. And this is one of the things that's been so confusing to me as someone who was involved with the church for a long time, is that how can you say that you think abortion is akin to murder, but then go, but I'm going to do nothing about it? You know, if I'm in a position to make a difference to the murder stats, I'm going to do nothing about it because that's my personal belief. Or how can you adhere to this kind of faith? We talked about this last week, that looks after the widows and orphans, but you say, you know, if you're a troublemaking Kaingoa house, we're going to kick you out. Where are you going to go? I don't know. Going to kick you out, though. Just those things seem incongruent to me, and I'm wondering how much of that Christian influence will be had versus how much. I mean, like, I would rather have someone show empathy and mercy towards people who are most vulnerable, but it seems that from what he voiced in the weekend on Q&A, he's like, you know, you'll be gone no matter what. It's trying to figure all that out and how much that actual Christian, quote unquote Christian influence would have in this party who is has a more of a theocratic look on the world than perhaps the National Party of 20 years ago.
It's looking a little bit doctrinaire, isn't it? I think there is Christianity. You can't use the definitive article. You can't talk about the Christian position, or you can talk about a Christian position. It's not to mix my metaphors, but I'm about to. It's a broad church. You know, you had people like Michael Joseph Savage who talked about his version of Labour Party politics as applied Christianity. If you looked at the liberation theologians who came out of Central America in the 80s and 90s, who were radical leftists, but who had a very doctrinally based interpretation or doctrinally based case for social justice. Those are Christians. You have an awful lot of Christian people in this country who would absolutely not identify with positions that are taken by some within the National and other parties who identify as Christian. So there are plenty of contemporary debates within Christianity, I think. So we need to be mindful of those. But I think what you're getting to, Pat, is a really important question about the extent to which somebody whose life is so strongly structured by Christianity is able to keep all that stuff at the door of the chamber when they walk in. I'm not sure that that's possible.
Yeah, and also last question, I guess, and it's really back to your article where you're talking about, you know, that Christopher Luxon. If people are just joining us, Christopher Luxon, and I'll read the exact article heading, after the election, Christopher Luxon's real test could come from his right, not from the left. Quite towards the end of the article, in fact, the last kind of paragraphs you read, such difficulties would be partly of National's own making. You go on to explain that, but basically, National gave ACT and David Seymour a path to Parliament 3, 4, 5, 6 elections in a row, it's almost like, what's that saying about the monster you've created eating you? Whatever that saying is. But it's like if they hadn't have been for National Giving Act Air, they wouldn't likely be there today to be this force that may end up eating its creator. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, when ACT was created, Sir Roger Douglas, Richard Prebble, Rita Richardson, I think, top of my head, for the first 3 MMP elections, 96, 99, 2002, they averaged around about 7 to 10%, and then they essentially disappeared. And since 2002, there's been one election, which was the one in 2020, at which the party has cleared the 5% threshold. They're only there by virtue of deals that have been struck between John Key and various leaders of the ACT party. So, that part of the article is just raising a question which is really for the National Party, depending on what happens on the big day this time round, and whether or not they do have to deal with a kind of a challenging, feisty David Seymour who holds them over various constitutional barrels in order to maximise his leverage. The fact that might take place is a consequence in part of choices which previous national parties have made in quite different political times. So that one may well come back to haunt them.
It's also shows how the left doesn't do politics very well, because the left in Epsom could also have gotten David Seymour out, because if you have a look at the number of people who voted for the Greens and for the Labour Party candidate, if they all had voted, for example, for Goldsmith, then there was enough votes there to get Goldsmith above David Seymour. So it speaks to me also of how the right seem to, shall I say always? I'll say always play politics a bit better than the left, because the left could have done something about that 2, 3, 4 elections ago, and they didn't. And of course, then the left hasn't had any handshakes with people who could have helped them as well. Raf Manji's a good example in Ireland at the moment. Now, I don't think Raf is actually necessarily there to help the left. I think he's more of a centrist, but the left seems to have ardently refused to do cup of tea handshakes when it may have helped them. The left voter seems to have ardently not been able to get around, for example, voting for Goldsmith and Epsom to get rid of ACT. And the right's like, here's the handshake, here's the keys to the kingdom, and now, as I say once again, the creation might end up eating the creator.
There's another, yes, and there is another way of looking at this as well. I think Verity Johnson from Stuff published something a week or two ago, which was an op-ed based on a series of conversations, anecdotal exchanges she'd had with people who she identified as centre-left people who were a little disaffected, a little disenchanted with Hipkins, and were not going to vote.
Yes.
My sense is that turnout will probably be lower across the board this time round for a bunch of reasons. But I think if that does, there's a bunch of assumptions here. If that does occur, and if turnout falls, and at least a part of that fall is explained by centre-left voters who are just sort of pissed off and get sulky and walk away and have an election off, that'll be another example of the kind of phenomenon that you're referring to. That'll be, some people can indulge themselves in that particular way. I think there are others who are going to experience material changes to their lives as a consequence of a change of government. And perhaps they don't have the luxury of deciding just to walk away from an election.
Yep, and I firmly believe, and from research internationally, that if every single person in a population voted, most Western civilization populations, if not all, lean to the left, but the left are more easily turned away from the vote, and the right seem to be better at getting around to vote, and that seems to be what keeps it a lot closer than it could be from time to time.
Yeah, and I think really broad terms, the left is probably inclined to take more doctrinaire positions and a little less inclined just to step back and engage in pragmatic politics.
Yeah. Professor Richard Shaw from Massey University, if you want to read the article that we are referencing right now, then just head to theconversation.com. I think you can just look up .co.nz as well, mind you. But if you can't find it, if you struggle to find it, just look up Richard Shaw and you'll get all 40 of the articles that he's written there. After the election, Christopher Luxon's real test could come from his right, not from the left. Richard, thanks so much for joining us today, especially, I'm sure, because you've got a million things to do and every media outlet in the country wants to talk to you, so I appreciate you giving us some time.
Cheers, Matt. Appreciate it.
Oh, kia ora whānau. Back again. Hope you're all well. Everyone okay there in the chat? You all having a good time there in the chat? Not too much? A little bit of argy-bargy? Everyone happy? Hope you're all happy. Please be happy. Don't fight. I can't handle it when you fight. Anyway, Free Soul says the new Conservatives are Christo-fascists. Steph says, I don't trust the angry thumb. Oh gosh, there's a few here from Freesoul that we've marked. Tamaki is a Christo-fascist. I'll tell you something about Brian Tamaki, which freaked me out a little bit. I put out a tweet a few days ago about Winston Peters citing white supremacist talking points. Now, it's been quite hilarious to watch on Twitter people saying to me, how can I call someone who is Māori a white supremacist, which I didn't do. It's a little bit like, and this is going to be a bit patronising, let's say you've got a child who says maybe they've heard the N-word and they use the N-word. Does that mean that they are racist, or that they're using a term that they don't understand, and it's a racist term? There's a difference between using the terminology and being that thing. Sometimes there's not, but I think that Winston Peters is espousing talking points of white supremacy to get his point across at the moment. And I was going to say, Brian Tamaki liked that tweet that I sent out. It felt a little bit dirty having him like my tweet saying that that Winston Peters has been using that kind of rhetoric. Don't know how I like that. There's a difference between Christian and Christo-fascist, says Freesoul. Simon says, then prominent members of the Methodist Church with the biggest founders of the Labour Party in the UK, I had more of an inference, Max. There's been a conversation between the two of you. And left-wing voters will need to grow up and be practical. Yeah, I think that's true. There's been several occasions, I'm sorry, none of them come to mind right now, but there's been several occasions where the left could have done a handshake to help get someone in or help get someone out, and they haven't done it. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, I think the right do play politics better than the left. Right, let's have a look at this new policy by ACT that they're bringing out very quickly. ACT is bringing out a policy. Oh, why didn't you come up? There we go. Thank you. In fact, let's go sideways because it's written. ACT leader David Seymour has announced the party's law and order policy. They say it's a compassionate policy, their law and order one. Last month, the party pledged to make changes to judges' sentencing principles, including removing all consideration of a convict's cultural background if elected. So therefore, nobody will be taken into account their upbringing, what's in their lives to do with the crimes they've committed. So if you're an abused child and you commit an abusive act, that background of you being an abused child will not be taken into consideration if ACT gets their way. ACT said it would ensure tougher sentences for serious crimes, increasing the capacity of the prison system and putting victims back in the centre of the justice system. The party's law and order policy released today promised to disqualify gang members from holding a firearms licence and impose tougher sentences for crimes on vulnerable workers. It is always funny when people are like, you know, people are purists, like the ACT are libertarians, yeah, pretty much. Like you think of the free speech thing, there are those people who are free speech purists, and I'm not one of those people, but there are those people who, no matter what abhorrent thing someone says, they'll go, and I'll defend your right to say that. Even though I disagree, I'll defend your right to say it. The same could be said for guns. If you're a party, and like the ACT party are pretty keen on guns, right? But they're not prepared to have guns for everybody. They basically want to ban gang members, which of course then does bring up the question, how do you identify a gang member? How are they ticked off as gang members? Now, if you were to say you're banning like convicted violent offenders from owning guns, cool, I can get with that. But just gang members, like an overarching tick, the same party that wants to make, you know, assault rifles be available to New Zealanders again also wants to blockade a group of people from having it. It feels a little bit like that. If you want to like loosen up the firearms laws, you've got to loosen it up for everybody, and that will come with serious consequences. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but to try and ring fence a group of people, no matter what their background, and say, but not you, seems kind of the opposite of what libertarianism would be. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that it's fantastic for everyone to be armed with firearms, whether you're in a gang or a criminal element or whatever. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is there seems to be hypocrisy with an ACT where they're trying to loosen up gun laws for New Zealand citizens, except these ones, because they wear a certain colour. Even if they've committed no crimes, like, because there'll be people within all those gangs who have committed no crimes. There will be some. But just because you're associated with that group of people, you don't get what we get to all the other New Zealanders. I can see a constitutional issue with that. Seymour said policies aim to restore the balance to a system that was focused on criminals instead of victims. A compassionate government looks to protect those who might find themselves to be victims first and then aims to rehabilitate offenders. Now, there's a very good point. rehabilitate offenders. How are you going to do that, Mr. Luxon? These are some of the policies that they've brought in, and a couple really jump out. They want to spend $1 billion to build an additional 500 prison beds. They want to reinstate the 3 strikes law, which has worked nowhere in the world ever. In fact, it's only done things to harm and make the criminal population worse. It has put people in prison, but for doing some very small and minor things on that 3 strike law. They want to take 17-year-olds out of the youth justice system, and it goes on and on and on. The ACT Party and their compassionate policy around crime. That's what they want to do. Okay, team, let's have a look now at the last thing for the night. We're going to have a squiz because we promised to do this yesterday and we ran out of time. Well, no, so we didn't run out of time. We ran out of technology. Is what we did. We're going to have a look at the second half of the Christopher Luxon conversation on Q&A. And so we've done the first half where they were talking about values. The second half of the conversation, they were more talking about the tax cuts and how they're going to pay for them. And I know that we've had this conversation before, but it's going on. It's going to go on tomorrow night as well, because there are a group of people, economists, who are releasing a report tomorrow on the international buyers tax that's been proposed. And National is still standing by it. They're saying it's going to work, it's going to work, it's going to work. So we're going to pick up this conversation when Jack Tame is asking Christopher Luxon about how are they going to sell $20 billion in property. Now, Jack, to be honest, uses a couple of silly examples here. He's like, oh, it'll be 3 Ponsonbys you have to sell. All that's kind of nonsense, to be really fair. But the question still is, how on earth are you going to sell $20 billion worth of property, Mr. Luxon, to get this tax that you're claiming you're going to get? Let's pick up the conversation.
So we talked about values in the first part. I want to talk about credibility in the second part. You have constantly sold your party as the party of economic credibility, and your central policy for the cost of living crisis is a $16 billion tax cut. Now, to pay for those tax cuts, you've got to sell $20 billion in property, right? $20,000 million of property. Now, just to put that in perspective.
So it's $5 billion a year to get the tax cuts.
I cross-checked One Roof data with Stats NZ data last night. You've got to sell 3.5 Ponsonbys.
It's a silly
example. To get to $20 billion, you need to take the GDP of Fiji, Samoa and Tonga and double it. So again, how are you going to do
example. That? Well, Jack, I can tell you, I can't.
Look, and let me just also say, I enjoy Jack Tame. He's spot on with a lot of this, but he's actually missed a really important point. It's not that the national government needs $20 billion worth of house sales. It's that they need $20 billion worth of house sales to international buyers that they're able to tax. That's slightly different, yeah? You see the difference? It's not just $20 billion. It's $20 billion to international buyers who will pay the tax. Now, we'll probably find out in more detail tomorrow, but we're already understanding that that tax doesn't apply to buyers from Australia, the UK, USA, Mexico, Canada, China, Japan, India. So you have to sell $20 billion worth of property to foreign buyers not from those countries. So that's actually what the question is, not just $20 billion worth of property.
Quite follow your numbers, but what I'd say to you is there's no doubt about it. When you take away all the noise in the selection, everything comes down to the economy. It's the number one issue that Kiwis are concerned about.
So how will you pay for those?
Well, I've been.
How will you sell $20 billion worth of property?
Let's take a step forward, back. I mean, what we're saying is, in government, we've got to do things.
We've only got limited time. Explain to me, how exactly will you sell $20 billion worth of property over 4 years?
What I'm saying to you is we're going to deliver New Zealanders tax relief. We're going to deliver low and middle income.
I'm sorry. How will you sell?
I disagree with your numbers. I'm not debating your numbers.
$20 billion?
No, I'm saying to you very clearly that we're going to make sure we deliver working New Zealanders income tax relief. The way in which we will do that is reprioritise spending.
No, I'm sorry. These are really simple.
Okay, so this is what we're getting from the National Party at the moment. It's a lot of trust me, trust me, trust me. Because Jack's right, it is a very simple question. What are you going to do in government to give us a society where $20 billion worth of property over 4 years will be sold to these people who are going to pay tax on it? And he hasn't answered it, and he won't answer it, and he keeps saying what the New Zealanders have to know is his tax cuts are coming. So what he's saying, he's either saying, fuck you, I'm not going to tell you, or he's saying, trust us, we know what we're doing. Neither of those answers are okay.
Questions, and this is your central policy. This is the policy that speaks to your economic credibility. As per your policy, you have to sell $20 billion worth of property over 4 years, right?
And Jack,
Yes.
I am really comfortable with our policy. As you've had Nicola on last week and we've talked about it, we've released all our information in our
I'm really comfortable is just trust me. That's what that means.
modelling.
You've released it all?
We've released these,
Have you released your
we've
modelling?
released 32 pages of actually our
I'm
cost
sorry.
assumptions.
I'm sorry. Have
We've
you?
released
No.
our reviewer advice.
Will you commit?
We've released lawyer advice.
Will you commit to releasing your specific modelling that shows how you will sell $20 billion worth of property to foreigners?
We have released a 30-page document with all.
You haven't released that modelling.
We have released our reviewers.
You haven't released that modelling.
Through all our assumptions. I'm very comfortable with that, and we've released even legal advice.
So, in the interest of credibility, does the public not deserve to see that modelling?
And Jack, what I'd also say to you is, since we've made that.
So, doesn't answer the question, doesn't answer the question, doesn't answer the question. And remember, this is the opposition who have been screaming bloody murder at a Labor government about their, about showing their workings, about being transparent. And it's a very simple question to go, you can clear this up today by releasing all of the modelling. Why won't they release the modelling? I'm actually a bit perplexed about that. I'd be happy to get some of your answers in the chat. Why aren't they releasing the modelling? They've released like 30 pages of the modelling, but why won't they release all of the modelling? Is it because they're sticking by we don't need to, or is it because there's some pretty big freaking holes in that modelling that they don't want people to see?
Those announcements, there's been a number of experts and advisors that have come out into the public domain and said, look, this is great.
If you are so confident with your numbers,
if you
are so confident with your numbers, will you commit to releasing that specific modelling?
I am extremely confident with our numbers. We have worked
great.
for months.
So will you
We've
commit?
got great
Will you
reviewers,
commit?
great advisors.
Will you
and,
commit to
and
releasing that specific modelling? That is the question. It's a very simple question. Will you commit to releasing the specific modelling that shows how you will sell $20 billion worth of property to foreigners over the next 4 years?
Not just
and
foreigners.
Jack, we have released already our 32-page document.
You want to be Prime Minister. You want to be Prime Minister.
This is advisors and consultants have given that advice.
Everyone watching this can see what you're doing, can see that you are going, just ducking. Every time I ask you, it's a yes or no. Will you commit to releasing that modelling?
We've already released the information we're going to release, Jack.
So no.
Yeah, that's
in other words, so no.
We've released what we're going to release.
Okay.
What's important that for New Zealanders watching the show is what they need to know is that low and middle income workers are going to get tax relief. The plan is fully funded. We have had it reviewed.
But we won't show you.
But you are not releasing that modelling, and this all comes down to economic credibility.
No, it doesn't.
What are you afraid of?
I'm not afraid of anything.
Then great.
I'm
Then release
delivering
the
a
modelling.
fantastic tax package for working New Zealanders, which is fantastic. It's brilliant.
So one issue is the numbers, and
no, there is no issue on the numbers.
Well, by all means, release the modelling. By all means, release the modelling. You could clear this up in a heartbeat. We wouldn't have to agonise over
we
this.
have
clear it up.
I'd encourage everyone jump on, look at the 32-page
and you will not find the modelling on that. Okay.
There you go. Good interview by Jack. Like I said, no criticism, but if we're being really correct, it's not that the $20 billion has to be sold. It's $20 billion to countries that aren't in tax treaties with us, which means all those countries I listed before, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, excuse me, but Australia, China, Japan, India, UK, USA, Canada, Mexico, they're not part of it because of the tax treaties. We're going to get to the next part of this conversation shortly, where actually a former Prime Minister that actually has quite a similar background to Mr. Luxon actually explains why it's not possible, which is a bit embarrassing, I think, for the incumbent leader of the National Party. Why won't they release their modelling? Raywin says because they haven't got any. Sam says it's such a red flag that he's being so coy. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like if you, I don't know how many of your parents out there, but if you're a parent and your child won't answer the question, you're like, what are you hiding? What are you hiding? What makes this worse is he saw Nicholas screw up prior, so he should have been prepared. Yeah, I agree with that as well. It's like, I don't know who are training these guys. John Key was famous for saying, I'm comfortable with that. Doom says, because he thought it was literal modelling and he was waiting for the glue to dry. Felix says he's a classic CEO who only gets told what's going on but has no idea. Well, that's interesting. And JK says just because they screwed up and they forgot about the tax treaties. I wonder if that's a bit like Forgot About Dre. I wonder if someone could write a song, Forgot About tax treaties, to the rhythm or to the beat of Forgot About Dre. What do you call it? Forgot About Trey? ETs? I don't know. Just brainstorming, people. Just brainstorming. So this is a really interesting part of the conversation. And after we've played this bit, we're wrapping up for the night. In this part of the conversation, John Key explains to us John Key from the past, explains to us how the tax treaties can actually be enacted, like how you can get around them. Because they figured out a way how you can get around what they were going to do, which was a stamp duty, which is the same as the tax. And they figured out a way you could get around them. The answer wasn't that crash hot for New Zealand citizens, though. So let's pick up this conversation when we're looking at John Key talking about, well, it's a conversation including John Key talking about when they tried to do a stamp duty, which is the same as what the National Party is trying to do with their taxes.
The next question is legality. So in 2016, John Key briefly considered taxing foreign buyers of New Zealand property with a stamp duty. And a stamp duty is extremely similar to the tax or fee that you are proposing. Now, he was asked at the time whether there were legal provisions that would exclude us from taxing Chinese buyers. And here's what John Key said at the time.
We don't have the right to put it on, funnily enough, a stamp duty. And the reason for that is that stamp duty was, taken off the table, if you like, through the free trade agreements we had, not only with Australia and Japan, and it also includes Mexico.
Because of the free trade agreements.
Again, stamp duty very similar to the tax that you were proposing.
Do it.
Now, since then, New Zealand signed the 2019 tax treaty with China, which has the same provision, meaning that we couldn't put in the discriminatory clause. However, John Key got advice that there was one way around that discrimination issue in the double tax agreements. There was one way to tax foreign buyers. You have to apply the fee to all non-tax residents. The problem with that is that it includes New Zealand citizens. So here's
all non-tax residents. So, there's a tradition in New Zealand of going on the OE when you're 18, 19, 20, 21. You go away for 3, 4, 5 years, you become a non-taxed resident, right? So I don't know if it's still the same as it was in my era, but you go away for 3, 4, 5 years, you work in a pub, you holiday around Europe, you bring pounds back with you, and then you buy a house. So the only way around this, that's a terrible freeze frame, by the way, Mr. Luxon. Put that tongue away. People have picked up on it too. Sorry, I'll just put these up there. Luxon's face. So confused. The only way around it is to tax non-tax paying residents, i.e. when New Zealanders come back from their OE and they want to buy a house, then they have to be included as well. John Key will explain this.
That's what John Key said. A tax on non-residents would capture some New Zealand citizens as well as foreigners, as it would be applied on the basis of residency, not nationality.
There you go.
So to be 100% clear, and please give us a clear answer on this, do you have expert legal advice that explicitly says you can tax non-residents, including Chinese buyers?
I'm sorry to interrupt this. I'm going to go back because this could be your next Prime Minister. He's just been shown by good journalistic work a massive gap in his policy and plan from his predecessor who tried to do the same thing and found his way around it. I implore you to watch his response, and when we make this into a clip tomorrow, share it with everybody.
Nationality. So to be 100% clear, and please give us a clear answer on this, do you have expert legal advice that explicitly says you can tax non-residents, including Chinese buyers, whilst creating a carve-out for all New Zealand citizens?
Jack, I'm not going to get into this with you. I'm going to be really clear with you about why where we are. Because we're...
Jack, I'm not going to get into this with you. Jack, I'm not going to answer your very fair question based on policies that my predecessor tried and gave us the answers to. Jack, I'm not going to get into this with you.
For all New Zealand citizens.
Jack, I'm not going to get into this with you. I'm going to be really clear with you about why where we are. Because where we are is we're saying you're focusing on one aspect of our funding for our
This
tax
is
plan.
fundamental to the credibility of your central policy. You want to be Prime Minister.
You are fixating on foreign buyer ban that we're putting in place.
You need a foreign buyer ban to raise $740 million
a year
in order to fund the tax cuts that you were giving to New Zealand.
Fund the tax cuts?
Yes.
Remember, there's other bits to it. Which
$740 million.
Now, let's make this clear, right? Luxon is pushing this aside, saying this is only a part of how we're going to fund it. It doesn't matter. This is a part of how you're going to fund it. This is $3 billion of your supposed $16 billion because it's $750 million a year over 4 years. So he can't say this is just a part of it because you know what? If Labor had a $3 billion hole in some of their plans, he would be shouting it from the rooftops. Right now, Jack's just gone, this is the only way it can work according to your predecessor. He said, well, this is not the only way we're going to service the tax break. you know, the tax cuts. It's not the only way we're going to do it. It doesn't matter. It wouldn't matter if it was 500 million and not 3 billion. You have to actually explain how this is going to work. And he refuses to do it because you know why? He can't do it. I would bet dollars to donuts he's never heard that before. I would bet dollars to donuts that this is new news to Mr. Luxon. And that's why he's, quote, not going to get into it with you, Jack.
Here, I've just asked you really clearly, and do you have expert legal advice that explicitly says you can tax non-residents, including Chinese buyers, whilst creating a carve-out for New Zealand citizens? Answer that question.
I appreciate there'll be a range of views about this topic.
Answer that question.
We have
do you have
advisors and experts that have actually said that this is possible, and we are going to do that. You've had issues put up by the Labor Party around FTAs. It's not possible. Well, it is. You've had issues put up around tax treaties. It's not possible. Well, it is. You've had issues put up and say that a ban's not possible to reinstate. Well, it actually is, you know, to undo it. And that's what we're doing. So we've had the advice. I appreciate the advice is different from the people that you may be hearing from.
I'm not hearing from anyone. I'm listening to
John Key. The people that you're hearing from, those weirdos, John Key.
John Key, the former Prime Minister, whom I know you were so close with. So he had major concerns about what you are proposing.
Advice,
and I've asked you...
think we can find a way through it and deliver it with great certainty so that every New Zealander, working New Zealander, gets a tax relief and tax break. And that's what's important.
What does it say about the credibility of the so-called economic managers
Bingo.
that you will not release tax advice that says what you are proposing is legal and possible, and you will not release the modelling around your numbers?
We have released a 30-page document about how this policy works.
But it doesn't have that information.
Our reviewers' advice has gone through all of our assumptions, and we have released legal advice as well. There have been subsequently a range of experts and people in the public domain, whether it's been people who've been previously on the tax working group, whether it's been people like Charles Finney who've done a lot of FTA agreements, and they're saying it's possible. So,
I've asked you if you have that. I've asked you
confidence that we are going to do it. We're going to get it done. And
so we just have to trust you. But you've got the advice.
Well,
we just have to trust you.
I don't know what more I can do.
Well, you can release the advice on both.
Oh my God, he is so bad at this. He is so, I wish Chewy was here. He is so bad at this. I don't know what else we can do. I don't know what else release the fucking modelling. He is so bad at this. He is so bad at this.
Whether it's been people who've been previously on the tax working group, whether it's been people like Charles Finney who've done a lot of FTA agreements, and they're saying it's possible. So,
I've asked you if you have that. I've asked you
confidence that we are going to do it. We're going to get it done. And
so we just have to trust you. But you've got the advice, but we just have to trust you.
I don't know what more I can do.
Well, you can release the advice on both of these fronts
as we can.
No, you haven't. No, you haven't. You haven't released the modelling. You haven't released the. You haven't released.
We're going to fund this by reprioritising government spending, and we're going to raise some new revenue.
What funding are you going to reprioritise?
As we said, around...
Jack Tame, I love you. So this is what we've been talking about for weeks now, yeah? We've been talking about the idea of these backroom people who are going to go away. Which jobs are going away? They haven't released it. They haven't told us. They keep telling us all these bureaucrats and backroom people are going to disappear. Where are the jobs going to go from? And I'm really sad that they have about 60 seconds left in this conversation, because this is a great question, and I hope the next time Mr. Luxon comes on TVNZ, this is the question they pick up with. Because I don't know how it works wherever you work or in what capacity you're in, but quite often the backroom people feed the office people who feed the front room people. So removing all of the backroom, and I'm not saying that there can't be some, let's just use the word cuts. I'm not saying it can't be more streamlined, but just this blatant, we're going to get rid of the guys in the back room, then how does the information get to the front if all the back end guys are gone? You know, it's not as simple as that, and he hasn't been pushed on this yet.
Some new revenue.
What funding are you going to reprioritise?
As we said, around government spending.
So where are you making those cuts?
Yeah, bingo.
Well, we're saying across the public service, we actually want people.
You haven't actually worked out where you're going to make those cuts.
No, we have. We've said a 6.5%.
So what departments?
6.5% reduction in backroom functions, and we'd sooner not have all the comm staff and all the management consultants. We want that in frontline services. We're saying in places like health and education. We will increase the budget every single year in our government, but we actually want that money recycled out of back office functions into frontline services.
Okay.
So
there you go. So back office functions going to go, frontline services are going to be the order of the day. I don't want to be too pedantic because, like I said, I'm sure there is some streamlining that could be done. However, often the back room feeds the frontline services, and they're not telling us what they're going to cut. Sam says he's going to get smashed in the debates. Maybe so. It may be too little too late. We'll have to wait and see. But of course, you got to vote to find out whether that is the case or not. Very last thing I'm going to play for you. It's not from the debate, but it's actually a story that came out tonight, and it does reference the conversation because people, New Zealanders, are now speaking out about the foreign buyer ban. The foreign buyer tax, the removal of the foreign buyer ban. TVNZ did that as a part of their research, part of their polling. Let's see what New Zealanders think about the foreign buyer tax, and then we're done for the night.
Christopher Luxon hoped allowing foreign buyers back would go down a treat. But it's become a headache for the national leader.
I'm absolutely confident and rock solid that we know what we're doing. We are absolutely rock solid on believing we can do this.
The party's refused to release its costings behind the policy.
Because we've given you what you need to see.
Leaving economists to rip it to shreds.
There is a range of opinion out there.
The removal of the foreign home buyer ban simply doesn't stack up. They've not found anybody that's argued that that would generate the sort of revenue that they think it will.
As for the public,
I think they support us taxing wealthy foreigners who want to purchase a house in New Zealand.
that support's not rock solid. In our poll, we asked whether people supported or opposed National's plan to allow foreign buyers to purchase homes over $2 million. 39% support it, but at 46%, almost half oppose it.
And I also wonder if that's got to do with, I'm not anti the idea of taxing international purchases, but I wonder if it's more to do with just opening up the market to international buyers. Because remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago. There's been nothing said about how many houses these international buyers can buy. So they buy 20 houses for $2 million, and that becomes their portfolio of houses in New Zealand. I've heard nowhere them saying they can buy one. You know, there's been people in the National Party saying, well, they're not going to buy a 4-bedroom house in Avondale. They want luxury houses. Why not? If a foreign buyer can come here and buy 20 houses in Avondale and West Auckland and in Wellington and Central Dunedin and then have a portfolio of houses as rentals, why wouldn't they do that? I mean, if they can, why wouldn't they? That's what you do. And then you can retire here, wealthy international person, and you've already got a portfolio of houses here waiting for you. So I wonder if the response from New Zealanders in this polling is more to do with we don't want wealthy foreigners to buy up all our houses, missing us out, as opposed to we don't want the tax. I think if most Kiwis are asked about the tax, they'd be like, oh yeah, if we can get some foreigners to give us some tax money, that'd be great. But I think it's more that we don't want them to buy the houses. That would be my guess, at least.
The rest didn't know.
I'm a little bit concerned about some of the effects that might have.
With Queenstown's...
Remember, wealthy homes, wealthy buyers, flash buyers. What's the average house price in Queenstown? They're going to reveal it here, but it's $1.7 million. That means an average house in Dunedin is, $2 million, give or take. So therefore, did I say Dunedin? Queenstown. An average house in Queenstown is $1.7 million. That means a foreign buyer can go and get the average house in Queenstown and set up. Don't have to buy the wealthy one, they can buy the average house.
House prices up 10% again on last year. He says the housing market is tight and National's policy could make it worse.
We've put a threshold in place as to make sure it doesn't impact New Zealanders.
Our average house price in Queenstown's 1.7. So at 2 million, I think she's probably a little bit too close. The 3 million ceiling will probably be a little bit better.
One News is expecting another bombshell to hit.
So I think wherever you live, right? Wherever you are in New Zealand, whatever your average house price is, that's the average house price in Queenstown. That means the middle income New Zealander, the teachers and the workers who are buying an average house in Dunedin are now going to be competing against foreign buyers. Sure, in Dunedin, $2 million house is a pretty flash house. Hawke's Bay, probably a pretty flash house. Auckland, nah. But so some places it will be a luxury house, but in Queenstown, it's basically your average house, and that's the difference.
At National's foreign buyer doorstep tomorrow as a group of economic experts are set to release a paper casting serious doubt over the policy and potentially blowing open a major hole in the costings. The pressure, though, already evident.
Taxing foreign buyers on luxury properties, wealthy New Zealanders and wealthy overseas foreigners wanting to buy a luxury property in New Zealand.
The National Party's plans simply don't stack up. They can't make their foreign home buyer tax stack up.
National left warming up to bat away criticism tomorrow. Mikey Sherman, One News.
This foreign buyers tax issue is hanging around. How worried is National about it?
National says it's not worried because it thinks that the prize of having a tax cut outweighs the scepticism around this foreign.
Remember, the prize of having a tax cut, if you are on the minimum wage, now you will get $660 a week, not $650, give or take, in your hand. $10 a week. So the prize of getting a tax cut for a minimum wage earner of $10 a week is going to waylay your fears of not being able to buy a house because all the $2 million houses have been bought by foreigners, which means all the Kiwis who wanted to buy $2 million houses are now buying the $1.5 million houses, which means all those Kiwis who are trying to buy the $1.5 million house are now buying the $1 million houses, which means all those people who are trying to buy the $1 million houses are staying in their $700,000 houses, which means there's no new houses for new home buyers. But look at us. Look me in the eye. Minimum wage earners, you get $10 a week. I mean, that's 3/4 of a block of cheese, even if you can't buy a house anymore.
Buyers issue. So they think that it outweighs it. You can see in those numbers it's not hugely popular, but they think that it's worth it. One of the things for National, though, is that for the last 2 weeks there have been these questions, these concerns raised around its big flagship tax cut policy, and that's not ideal for them. This poll today was the first of weekly polls that we'll have in the lead up to the election, so we'll see how things move and shift around over the next 5 weeks.
There we go. So look, I mean, this is us for the night. I think we're done. I think it's always good to nut these ideas out. So what would make this idea of Nationals better? What about if it was on $5 million homes? Maybe that could make the difference. $5 million homes? $10 million homes? Because if you're going to buy a $5 million home, you're not going to necessarily impact the $1.2 million market. But if you're going to buy a $2 million home, you are definitely going to impact the average house market in Queenstown and probably the slightly above average house market in Auckland. I think the average house price in Auckland might be just over $1 million. So, but if they could buy $5 million houses at a 15% tax, maybe. But certainly it's it's a recipe for disaster, and I'm not sure what this article is that's coming out tomorrow, the report by whichever economist it is, but it sounds like it's not going to be great news for the National Party. Now, in saying all of that, going back to the first story of tonight, they are riding high in the polls, so maybe Mr. Luxon is correct, and maybe it's not that people are more thankful for their tax cuts than worried about the international buyers. Maybe it just comes back to they just hate Labour that much. Maybe that's all it is. And it's a little bit like Donald Trump, the old saying, I could stand in the middle of New York and shoot someone to death and get away with it. Maybe that's sort of the truth to do with National. Maybe it's down to we could do whatever policies we wanted to, and people are hating the left so much at the moment, it doesn't matter. Maybe there's some truth in that. All right, team, we're done for the night. Just remind you again, thank you for being with us tonight. Remind you one more time before we head off that we've basically got 2 nights left of our September merch drop. If the left vote, the left wins hoodies and T-shirts. The reason we're stopping these tomorrow night is people want them before the election, so we're going to make sure we get them out. There was actually a delivery done today to me, which I'm going to be packing up and sending out tomorrow. So if you ordered your stuff last week, you'll probably get it for the first part of next week. First part of next week? What is it tomorrow? Wednesday? Or you might even get them at the end of this week. Hopefully. Extra day to get printed. And there's been a few balls up with a couple of the orders. So if I write you a grovelly email, you might have to wait a few more days, but I apologise about that. So if you want to be involved with this, the free delivery code for today is OOPSIE, OOPSIE on checkout. That's only active for another 7 minutes, so you'll need to be quick. A big thank you to Bruce, who bought one earlier this evening. And we'll be doing this one more night tomorrow night. Thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate you being a part of what we're doing. I don't know if it'll be just me again tomorrow night, or we'll have a co-host, or maybe even a puppy dog in with me as well. I don't know, something like that. But lots going on. We'll definitely be having a look at that new release from tomorrow. And we will... maybe see if we can get someone to comment on it. I don't even know what the report's going to be, what the article's going to be, but it's obviously going to be some serious heavyweights in the economic world. If I can potentially get one of them, we'll see what happens. All right, team, you've been beautiful. Thank you for being with us tonight. Really appreciate you all. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow night for another edition of Big Hero News. We'll see you at 9 p.m. Make sure you bring a friend. And if you're watching us on TikTok, you're not, because we got kicked off. Not sure why we got kicked off. I'll have a look at that after after I've logged off with you guys. All right, team. Cheer. See you tomorrow night from 9. Hooroo.